Hey everybody, it's good to see you back once again. So it's time to get into the Ampli-Torque high-low range portion of X231. And this tractor kind of pioneered this technology for Minneapolis-Moline. Before this one, I don't believe they had much going on for high-low range units. There's some talk that maybe they toyed with it in the older prior Z models a little bit, but it never left pre-production stage. So this is kind of an interesting evolution, if you will, with X231 because it shows signs of different high-low range setups that had been used in the past, different features inside and outside between the top cover and the casting. We will get into figuring that story out in a bit, but what it ended up being was pretty close to what the production piece was in the 445. There are a few differences between this one that came out of X231 and a production one, but for the most part, what we have here is a carbon copy. And we're going to do things a little bit out of order this time because this unit is so rusty and dirty and stuck, it's hard to really get a good look at it even before we get it apart and get it cleaned up. So we have, in episodes past, already refurbished the one-way clutch and rear bearing housings, and we've also removed the rear hub from this unit as a part of that work right there. So that means we can get these loose bolts out of the way. We can also get this spacer washer off, as well as this thrust washer from the back. So we'll flip this over to begin the rest of the disassembly. So these are fairly straightforward units, really. The top portion is a twin disc brand bimetallic over center wet clutch. Bottom portion is a Planetary gear set. All right, so we can just lift the clutch portion out the top. That's the over center part, all the discs. And we're left with the Planetary gear set and drum on the bottom. So we'll begin by taking the brass, do we call it a yoke? I'm just going to call it a yoke for now. This brass collar at the top throws the clutch in and out. We'll get that out of the way. Just a couple half-inch bolts and nuts, securing each half. There we are. And now we have the clutch spider with the links and the dogs. And Minneapolis-Moline loves roll pins, all kinds of tiny roll pins. The dog link pins, secured by roll pins. The main pivot pins, turn it up, see, secured by roll pins. And we've taken some measures off camera to facilitate the removal of these because it just makes things go a lot smoother when I'm actually recording. So all right, pull all three of the main pivots out. And the dogs and the spider and the links come off. And now we can depress this plunger. I'm already seeing some damage around there. Oh boy. All right, depress the plunger. There we are. And this threaded collar comes off. This is what adjusts tension on the over center clutch. Pretty standard setup, really. All right. So we can, plunger and spring, pull out of there. Here's the top pressure plate. And this was the damage I was talking about. The pocket for that plunger has 1 crack, 2 cracks, 3 cracks. I'm not sure how you do that, but it's X231. And this is pretty standard. You can see twin disc clutch company cast right into the pressure plate. And I believe this is a twin disc number A42830, looks like. So otherwise, that looks pretty good on the back side. Man, that's a shame. And here is the clutch pack. Like I said, bimetallic, so we've got some bronze discs and steel discs, alternated every other. And of course, viscous drag. We have just a slight coating of oil on them, so it makes them want to stick together. For the most part, though, they're really not looking too awfully bad. Rear pressure plate comes off. There's our sun gear. This plate doesn't look too bad either, really. Surprises me. So that leaves us with the Planetary unit. We can pull that center thrust washer out. It just floats in there. And these Planet gears rotate on these 3 pins. All right. And they're held in by these snap rings plus that rear hub that we have off right now. So once that rear hub is off, they can all come out this direction. And usually they float pretty easily. I might have to tap these. I got that one to move a little bit, but this is awfully dry. There. That's moving easier. And these are typically rolling on non-caged needle bearings, so sometimes things fly all over the place, fall out when you pull these pins. We'll just see what happens. So far, really, that one doesn't look bad. Sometimes if they're dry enough, all the needles stay in. Yep, okay. There you can see them. There's this rear ring, and then there's a spacer in between. And then there's an upper ring too. There's 2 sets of needles in there. And when you put these together, you want to hold them all in with some heavy grease. Wow, these are dry. Usually they just float right in and out. I'm having to tap these all the way out. We're out of the Planet gear though. Get that out of the way. Yep, there we got some falling out. That's more like it. Wow. Third and final. Let's see what our luck is like on this one. Stop moving, but we can get the gear off. All right. And finally, sun gear comes out the middle. Pretty dry and rusty in there. And that's really about it. Okay, everybody, it is the following day. I ended up spending a lot of time cleaning and inspecting every piece of that Ampli-Torque drive. Let me show you what I found. A quick rundown of what's on the bench. Everything to right here has been cleaned, inspected, and is going back into X231. Everything here is what I found to be bad and I had to replace, and everything right here is parts. These were 2 other Ampli-Torque units that I had picked up just to have around for such an occasion, and they came in handy because I pulled pieces from each one. And that goes back to my rule of 3. I've always said it takes me 3 of anything to build 1 really good stand-up unit, sometimes even more. So my rule of 3 keeps proving itself out again and again and again. Starting with the piece we already knew was bad, this top pressure plate that had that cracked detent pocket. I pulled a very good one from the parts pile, so we're set right there. The bottom pressure plate was good, as well as the clutch pack. Surprisingly, all the bronze discs were really good, and the steels actually look good. There's a little bit of like water staining on them, but there aren't any heat checks, no cracks, no warpage. That's actually a pretty good clutch setup that we've got going on. I also had to replace all 3 of the clutch dogs that pivot on the Spider. The originals had each taken some hits. You can see there we are, that scuff mark that's on the end of that link. And I put the cross pin in this one so that you can see how skewed the link end is. And each one was bent in the same direction. And I suspect that may have been caused by a very prototype Ampli-Torque engagement lever on the inside of the case, but we're going to have to get a little further along before I can prove that theory out. And I found quite a few issues with the primary sun gear, all 3 planetary gears, all 3 planetary gear pins, all 3 sets of needle bearings, and all 3 sets of needle bearing thrust washers. So I had better ones. I just swapped them right out. I found too much step wear on the old pins where those bearings rode. I also found quite a bit of wear from the needles cutting into the thrust washers. I could have just flipped them to renew the surface, but again, I had better ones. Might as well just replace. The primary sun gear, aside from being rusty, I really didn't find anything wrong with it, but as long as I was already replacing all 3 planetary gears, I might as well replace that one too because we had better ones to choose from. So the 3 of these are not a matched set, and this tractor, nothing surprises me at this point, but we'll never know what the full history was. So these bottom 2 are pretty evenly matched. They've got the same depth of oil relief groove in the top, but on the third one, it's noticeably shallower. So these bottom 2 also have right there, if I can glint it just right in the light, it's an SMCO company logo. I'm not sure what that means, but they've got, again, the single oil channel milled into the back, single channel back there. This one does not have that SMC logo, but it's got a secondary oil channel that somebody has ground into it, and there's an X that's been scrawled back there. No other markings. So odd man out for sure. Yeah, we're just going all new route. These are the old bearings as well. They were really dry, and I just had a lot better pieces to use. So that's the route we're gonna go. And to wrap up the bench overview, we have the secondary sun gear. It has this bushing on the inside, and that bushing is one that I was thinking I might have to replace. It goes on the input shaft to the transmission like that, and we're running just a tick over 10 thousandths clearance on that. And considering that only spins on that shaft when we're in low range, and the current plan for this tractor is to only ever put it in low range once to prove that it works, I'm calling a 10 thousandths clearance good to go. So as I said, nothing here is really dedicated prototype that I can tell. A couple of pieces have a hint of prototype character to them, like this bronze yoke. The edges are all more rounded than a production version, and there are no numbers on it. The production one here, a lot squarer edges, more mass, and we have the 10A7921 number in each yoke half. This washer here, the thing just looks homemade. It's the one that goes on the back of the planetary carrier, holds those 3 pins in. These notches look like they were cut in like with a hacksaw. They're all different sizes, nothing's uniform. Compare that to the production version. There's quite a different profile between the two. Aside from that, everything else here looks like production, but early production 445 parts. Interesting bit on this planetary carrier. We got all these grinding marks on that web, some more grinding marks there. The third one is still clean. That's pretty common to see on the early 445 Ampli-Torque housings. That was, I think, an attempt to take some metal away to balance the rotating assembly out. Here's an example of a later production planetary carrier. You can see they stopped grinding on the outside and they started doing the strategic drillings on the inside above each web. That's just a much more professional way to balance an assembly out. So that concludes the overview. Let's start putting it all together. So the quickest way to open up a lot of bench space is to put the clutch portion of this together first. So we'll begin with the secondary sun gear, and I just finished brushing gear oil on all the splines. That's going to be a recurring theme here with most of the pieces. So first one to go on is the rear pressure plate. Next, we can stack all of the clutch discs. I've coated the bronze ones with gear oil once again. The steel ones will just pick up enough oil from the bronze. We don't have to worry about brushing it on them too. So just alternate every other. Next comes the top pressure plate and our spring-loaded plunger and the adjusting collar. spider with the clutch dogs now. I've also pre-greased the pins. Sometimes they can be a bit tricky to line in. There we go. That should do it for the final roll pin. So one tip, it helps to get just a little bit of over-center clutch engagement to help hold these pivot pins from spinning when you go to drive those roll pins in. So just to make this easier to work on for the next step, I'm going to just cinch that collar a little bit. I want just a tad more over-center snap. That's good. This is where the bronze yoke can go on. So we've got grease where it needs to be. Each half just slides in. And what I've done is I have flipped it, okay, because you can see some pretty good wear witness marks there and there, as well as right there and right there. It doesn't look like it's ever been flipped. And where the forks grab onto each one of those legs, you get just some wear over time from it resisting the rotational, force of the whole assembly. And I just flipped it over. It just renews all the surfaces. It turns the ugly ones out. But, where it counts, everything's going to be brand new. And with the bolts tight, do the spin test. Good. So, last step is to get the carrier front and center. We will unlock the over-center clutch so that we can guide the bronze discs down into the carrier. That's going to get them all lined up. Yep. Re-engage the clutch. Our clutch pack is now in perfect alignment. So that concludes the assembly of the clutch portion. Planetary's up next. So I've just spent the last 30 minutes off camera carefully stacking the 2 rows of needle bearings into each Planetary with that center spacer sleeve in the middle. Just pack them in with everything coated with a heavy sticky grease, and don't stop until it is on your nose and above an eyebrow and behind one of your ears, and that's when you know you're pretty well good. So spin this around. To begin the assembly, we'll take the primary sun gear. We've got this snout, that hub on that side, that goes down. Next, with the thrust washers also stuck to each side of the Planetary gear, that's going to hold all the needles in. Carefully drop that in, trying to keep everything in alignment best you can. You're probably going to have trouble with this step. That's just comes with the territory. And if you're really lucky, you can get the pin to line through both rows of needles and that center spacer without having anything fall sideways on you. There we go. First one in place. There's number 2, and pay attention to these oil grooves because they also double as timing marks. You can see all 3 are pointing to the center. That is the proper way to set one of these up. This is a timed Planetary gear set, so you just want to be mindful of that when you go to put it back together. Flipped over now, we can look at putting the rear hub onto the carrier assembly. But I ran into a little bit of a problem. So I went to fit this oddball spacer that goes beneath the rear hub, and I quickly noticed we've got a heck of a gap right there. See that? So what's happening is it's being held off of the carrier housing by the end of each pin. and our kind of crude hacksaw slots that were cut in there. You can see it's apparent they were put in place to try and clear the leg ends of those snap rings that are at the top of each pin. So of course these pins are held from drifting that direction by the snap ring. They're held from drifting up by the flange of the hub. That's how that works. And remember, we replaced all three of these, as well as the needle bearings and all of the gears. And I was under the assumption these were just production shafts, these old ones. But now that I look at them, you can see there's been some grinding going on the top. And the step shoulder that is above the groove that the snap ring goes in is a lot shorter on these than it is on these. So we have some oddball prototype kind of it's kind of a characteristic of these. They're just not, I wouldn't call them production, and this is definitely not production. So the logical step, the logical thing to do would be place the production spacer ring right there, because you can see it's cut a lot differently. It stays entirely off of the ends of the pins so that when the hub is placed down onto it, we have a good tight bolt up surface, and then the hub just gently extends over the tops of those pins and just lets them float by a few thousandths. There's not a bind scenario going on. So this is another instance where I'm not going to be happy no matter which direction I go, because as we found with the rear end, as soon as you change one prototype piece, a lot of times you get the cascade effect where you also have to change every other piece that interacts with it, and this is another one of those scenarios. So there's something to be said for, I could clean those shafts up and put them back in here because the TA is never really going to get flogged in low range, but we also have a responsibility to make this the best that we possibly can. So I've made the decision. Our prototype spacer ring is going to be stored away with the discarded prototype shafts. That will be put in the box with the shift forks and rails and all the blown up gears that came out of it. All the old surplus parts that we can't use, we are saving. So we're just going the production route. Spacer in place. We've got the thrust washer goes on the back side of the hub. Grease is in place to hold that. And we just bolt it up. And with everything tight, we can flip it over. Timing marks are well in line. Looking good. We've got this final thrust washer that goes right in the center like that. And we're not going to stick this one in place with grease just yet because it's probably coming out for the demonstration next time. But we can take the clutch unit, just try to line everything in. There we are, gears meshed at the bottom. That is the Ampli-Torque drive unit. We've got it built. Lots of work went into this assembly right here. Okay everyone, I'm going to call the episode right here, but we've got a bench full of completed sub-assemblies ready for next time. The one-way Sprague clutch, the bearing support, and the completed Ampli-Torque unit, which is actually a nice looking assembly. Once you get one all cleaned up, a little bit polished, yeah, good stuff. All those pieces are going to start being put into this small compartment right here next time. I'd also like to get a little bit more into how the thing actually works. The trouble with the Ampli-Torque is it just about needs to be fully installed to really show how everything spins and holds and turns. It just needs to be supported and aligned in so many different places. I think getting it put in is going to be the easiest way to do that. So once again, everyone, I want to thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you back again.